to go ahead and start. So good afternoon, everybody. I am Vicki Palmer, AURP CEO, and thank you for joining our AURP webinar today. Today's gathering is a first in the series of our AURP Tech-Based Economic Development, TBED, Community of Practice webinars and peer group roundtables. The Community of Practice builds the increased capacity of EDA grantees to achieve greater impacts for their regional innovation economies. AURP's work with this community emphasizes identifying and distributing best practices in structuring, measuring, and planning TBED initiatives, plus fosters a community among grantees among varied types of TBED activities and target audiences. Today's webinar will focus on current real estate trends. Are our communities of innovation experiencing similar situations as our commercial real estate market? Is funding even available or a challenge among our innovation community? Our panel experts today will be moderated by Kevin Byrne, an AURP past president and president CEO at TUF, the University Financing Foundation. So thank you for being here today, Kevin.
All right, thank you, Vicki. And on behalf of my panelists, Linda, David, and Scott, I welcome you to this really interesting panel and timely panel where, you know, as I am out, whether we call it at cocktail parties or even just in the daily course of business, this question comes up almost every day right now is, are we having challenges at innovation districts, research parks, innovation hubs that are similar to the challenges that we're hearing about and seeing about in the national real estate markets? So these experts are experts in real estate, both in the commercial side and on the university side. So I'm going to have them introduce themselves. I'll just first say a little bit more about the context that I bring. So as Vicki said, I'm president of the University Financing Foundation. So by our name, we do financing and real estate development for college universities around the country, primarily at these Research Park Innovation District sites. And it's really interesting because we have not seen the same trends that the market is seeing, general market is seeing, as we go around the country. And I'm going to share in a few minutes why we think that's the case. But my context is a national context where we see many different markets, but we also see differences within markets. And we're going to talk about that in a second. So first, let me introduce Linda Hall, and she'll tell you a little bit about herself and a little bit of her context.
Thank you, Kevin. Hello, my name is Linda Hall. I am currently, as of 1 month tomorrow, Executive Vice President and CFO for a newly created organization called NC Innovation. It is a public-private partnership that was endowed by the state of North Carolina in October with a $500 million endowment, all in the effort to support research and innovation directly through a statewide mission of all the public higher ed institutions in the state of North Carolina. We have both regional and grant programs, but more particularly and probably more relevant to this conversation, I spent the last 17 years at the Research Triangle Park in the same area as both COO and CFO, and was very involved in a lot of the evolution. For those of you who do not know much about the Research Triangle Park, it's a 65-year-old park founded with, and as part of our governance, the 3 R1 universities, Duke, NC State, and UNC, and it has created a successful sort of boon in the state of North Carolina, where it really has we have today a diverse industry mix of R&D, tech, biotech, life science. Within Research Triangle Park, we have 2 large federal agencies, NIH and EPA, and then also a research institute, RTI International, which was actually the sister organization for the park, RTF, that I worked for. We were the economic development side, and they were really the research side. So quick couple of stats, Research Triangle Park is 7,000 acres, one of the largest and oldest parks, and I think a model for a lot of innovation districts today. It does have size and scale in terms of geographic land, about 370 companies, and interestingly, 22.5 million square feet. But when you think about that size of 7,000 acres, it's very low density built park. And I think I'll just pause there and turn it over back to Kevin.
All right, thanks, Linda. And so, like we're saying, your context started at RTP in the Triangle and the 3 research institutions there, you know well, and now you've broadened out to North Carolina. We'll next go to Scott Selig, who's at Duke, who can give some of the same perspective, but from the other side, from the private university side, and specifically in Durham.
Good afternoon, and thank you. I'm Scott Selig. I handle the real estate that is off campus for the university and the health system. Again, we're in Durham, which is a town of about 400,000 people in a metro of about 1.5 million ballpark. We have a lot of space off campus, about 4 million square feet. About a little less than 1 million of that is high-end lab tech space, and then there's a lot of other healthcare space and those kinds of things. I come at the world from a private sector developer background, have now been sitting in this chair, though, for the institution about 20 years. We were growing at about 150,000 feet a year off campus. We've now slowed that growth rate, obviously, post-COVID, and have dropped some administrative space. The market is moving relatively quickly here, I think, compared to the rest of the world. I don't know how much detail we want to go into at this point, but we do have some bright spots. I'd sort of call it a silver lining around the dark clouds.
Hey, amen. And I'm looking forward. I know everybody else is looking forward to hearing some more details in a couple of minutes. Thanks, Scott. So we've got North Carolina covered. We've got the Triangle covered really well. So now I want to branch out and think a little bit more nationally. And that's why we've got David Tyndall, who will introduce himself now.
Good afternoon. I was just noticing that I am a slightly heavier version than the David Tyndall you see on the screen, and so have some work to do. But I'm glad to be with y'all today. As Kevin said, we can talk a little bit more about some broader national trends that we see. But my company is called Collaborative Real Estate. I have been in the business of discovery and innovation-oriented real estate for about 26 years now. And I'm sitting in our flagship project, kind of our inaugural project, and still our flagship project. That is a place called Technology Square, or Tech Square, if you will, in Midtown Atlanta, adjacent to Georgia Tech. And we were the original co-developers of Tech Square, and I have been here officing for the past 25 years. So we have maintained ownership here. We've maintained operation responsibility here, and it's served as a great laboratory as we've tried to understand the unique needs of a research-centric development, and a lot of lessons learned. So I started out as a developer, and our developments in this space turned out to be very successful, and I was very self-congratulatory that I must be a brilliant developer, and that all of my projects were full and occupied quickly, and some had waiting lists to get in. And about 15 years ago, I kind of had a Damascus Road experience and was convicted in a moment that the things that I thought that I had done, my contribution to the success of my properties, really had pretty much ended at the certificate of occupancy. And to that extent, I recognize that the people that came to these type spaces really weren't coming for the architecture per se. They could be scared away by bad architecture, but in reality, all of the reasons that they come to these properties really boil down to the congregational effect of being around other people that are in the discovery business. So that's a very unique aspect of, I think, innovation-based real estate, where the people themselves are the amenity. And once I had that perspective, I realized that if I wanted to continue to have people want to be here, we really needed to pay a lot of attention to the opportunities that they had to experience one another and to get those benefits. And so really started pioneering some, I think, novel techniques in the property management arena that were tailored to these, really popular word now, ecosystems. And so while we still develop, we are really keenly focused on operations, to the extent that more recently our acquisitions have not been so much through ground up development, but recognizing there are a lot more buildings that have been built than buildings that need to be built. And so we've been plying our trade more recently with acquisitions and taking buildings that weren't necessarily managed to optimize their potential, and then bringing our techniques to bear. So again, we have several laboratories around the country now, but this Tech Square is still kind of my main where I can get in and really start pulling levers and see what happens. So looking forward to sharing with y'all about that.
Perfect. Thanks, David. And the messages that you just heard from the three of them would suggest that there is not one particular reason why, if we were to posit that innovation communities are not falling prey to the current market trends, there's not one reason. All right, it begins at conception, it goes through development and financing, and then it goes ultimately through operations. All of that is why we feel like these innovation hubs are not falling into the same trends. However, though, we will say that there's probably one foundational aspect, and Shelby, go ahead to the next slide, which is the research enterprise and the corresponding collaboration and innovation that comes out of that. Actually, Shelby, go back 2 or 3, get one more. Okay, one more, that's perfect. So what I'm going to do is again, posit this concept of research, first with the broad investment in R&D in the U.S. All right, so this slide, and this is courtesy of a presentation that Brian Darmody made, where we're saying generally in the U.S. there is significant investment in R&D. Now, this slide in particular says private investment in R&D is outpacing public investment. National and state investment, that's the orange line, the blue line at the top being the private line. But the essence of that, though, is the significant investment in R&D, which is leading to places like these innovation hubs that we've been talking about. Go ahead to the next slide. Then if you break down the orange line from the previous slide, this is where is the public investment coming from, and it's coming from the national sector and then the state sector, and you see the big divide between federal investment in R&D and state investment in R&D, but still large investments in R&D. And then go one more, Shelby. And this will show you, so let's look at just the national, and this shows you for department by department where investment in R&D is coming from. And you see those bottom lines, DOD and NIH are well outpacing all of the other agencies. Again, and all of that will chime true in the next couple of slides. So now go ahead to probably Shelby. Yeah. All right. So what I want to do is talk about 5 different markets, and we're going to talk about 8 different schools within those 5 markets. And then I'm going to let the experts talk about, all the different things that are important, not only about these slides, but about everything else that makes us not fall prey to national trends. So this is Georgia Tech's research enterprise. The annotations are important because some of the times it will reflect leadership changes, governance changes, changes in the way that the research enterprise it collects its capital. But you see Georgia Tech goes from 300 million to, $1.2 billion over this 20-year term. So again, we're going to suggest that Georgia Tech and Tech Square that David mentioned is not experiencing the trends in the traditional real estate market because of the strength of the research enterprise, in addition to many other things. All right, go to the next slide, and this breaks down the sources. So I just showed you the sources on the first couple of slides. This shows you the blue is federal funding, the orange is state funding, the gray is institutional funding. So Georgia Tech, funded highly by DoD, it has as experiencing these great research enterprise increases, which again, we are correlating to success in the innovation district because of their research followed by industry collaboration. All right, go on to the next one. So I'll pick up the three in the triangle, and I'm going to go much quicker now that I've given you context of the slide. You see Duke's enterprise, significant increase over these 20 years. Go on to the next one. And you see they still have significant federal investment, but you see here they have a little bit different from the industry side. The yellow is industry. So they've got a much higher industry than a public university like Georgia Tech. Again, Scott could probably explain what some of these nuances are. Go on to the next one. NC State, you see their increase in the overall enterprise, and go on to the next slide. Their sources, you see they have less federal, more state, public university, state university, and then greater institutional investment in R&D. So where the university is putting their own dollars back into the research. All right, go on to the next one. And you compare that to public university, University of North Carolina, you see its enterprise is still increasing, but Chapel Hill, again, is a great innovation community. Go on to the next slide. You see they don't have as much state as NC State. Again, I'd love to hear the thoughts on the panelists of why that may be a difference between two public universities, but their federal is much greater than the NC State federal research. But all of these, again, it's not comparison. One of these is better than the other. These are reflective of universities that are leveraging their ability to bring research from federal, state, institution, and private sector. All right, a couple other markets we'll look at. David's going to talk a little bit about Pittsburgh, so go on to the next one. So we'll show Carnegie Mellon's research enterprise growth over the time. You even see that they had a dip that they've recovered from, and go on to the next one, where they have, again, significant federal research, a good amount of industry research, and then they've started to invest heavily institutionally. All right, go on to the next one. This is University of Pittsburgh in that same market, and those two universities are within blocks of each other. Again, you see they had a great exponential increase in the early 2000s and then have continued to increase over these last 10 years. And then let's go look at their sources. So significant federal dollars research. And that green is other, so it's just a combination of other sources of R&D investment. All right, now let's look at these last two. We're not going to talk a whole lot about Austin, Texas, but if you're saying, well, what other markets are not experiencing the same declines? Which ones are actually seeing great increases in their real estate markets, especially around the university? Austin is one, Texas is one. In Austin, you see their great increase, and let's look at their sources. So a good blend, federal, state, institutional. You're going to see a lot of institutional increase in Texas in general. Texas put billions of dollars into a Texas University Fund, a TUF, a research fund. All of the Texas universities are going to see significant increase in their institutional investment in research dollars because of that. All right, that's Texas. And then I'll end for my good friend Jeff Smith in East Lansing. Michigan State, good increase over time. And then let's look at their sources. So great federal amount, but then again, big institutional investment in R&D from the institutional level. Okay, so that's all the slides. We're going to go back to now just generally talking with the panelists, but again, we're positing that the success that we're seeing foundationally lies at the research enterprise level, but there's plenty of other reasons So I just generally ask, I'll ask David this question first. What's the underlying reason you see in the divergence in R&D versus in R&D markets versus general real estate markets? You're on mute.
I think those slides really tell the story. If we were at a commercial real estate conference, that opening salvo would have shown, here's GDP growth nationally over the last 20 years, and here's how the total inventory of commercial spaces have grown, and they would fairly well correlate. And I think a good way to think about our type of real estate is those figures are not the totality of our GDP of research, but they're a really important driver of it. And so long as you see that kind of growth, you know, the more research enterprise there is, the more needs that it has for real estate, and therefore, just like some other areas of real estate, distribution centers have been doing pretty well real estate wise as well. Data centers are now doing extremely well because they're a growth portion of the overall national economy. And we are just another tiny sliver in that. And our sliver has certainly been growing. So I think we've had great macro fundamentals in our very small submarket. And then as well, you know, and again, I don't know how many of the attendees here follow what's happening in commercial real estate generally. I can assure you, I get at least 20 expert updates a day in my inbox. And so, you know, I mean, a kind of quick story for office, which our spaces look the most like office, well, at least from the outside. You know, when the pandemic came, I have given talks where I tried to be outrageous and say that COVID didn't change anything. COVID revealed things. And I think that, you know, the changing nature of work certainly was what COVID exposed, and the accommodations that could be made for it, and the forced experimentation on most businesses into telecommuting on steroids. It stood to reason that there'd be a goodly number of those that found positive results from it. And so it doesn't have to be that there'll never be people going to the office or we'll never get all the way back. But, you know, if 20% was recognized to be not necessary in a market with hundreds of millions of square feet, that 20%, you know, will be realized over time as leases roll, and you'll have this effectively headwind of vacancy and lack of demand. It would be bad enough if every building experienced a 20% drop in demand, but that's not what really happens. And if you really look at it, the greatest buildings are where people are going to. And so the ones that aren't really that great, that don't really have any differentiator, they're just commodity spaces, they don't have a 20% reduction. They're seeing 60 and 70% reduction. And that is obviously just a devastating blow to revenues. And then unfortunately, the fortunes of real estate are some degree linked. And that devastating effect on the low end of the market is also having a drag down effect and showing that we're a more risky asset class now. And so all values are coming down. That's kind of the carnage that's going on in commercial real estate. And how we're different is we're not seeing that people think there's, well, 20% of the researchers don't need to come research anymore, or they can research from home. We just don't see that kind of realization going on, so we're not experiencing anything like those dynamics.
Great. So Scott, what do you see, you know, both from your perspective sitting in the Duke chair, but you're all around the triangle. What all do you see in that market?
Well, we took a 273,000 square foot lease on March 13th to 2020. But that was for the Duke Human Vaccine Institute. Sometimes you get lucky. And so we're helping to solve those problems actually in RTP. So the distance between RTP and downtown Durham is about 7 or 8 miles. What's different about our market is that we're seeing a lot of tech inflow. As an example, post-COVID, David talked about office space. 5 companies have taken space in Durham post-COVID. They're Apple, Google, Meta, Boston Consulting Group, and Clorox. They've all taken office space in that, and they're coming here because of the authenticity and because of the vibrance of what that space is. Now, they're taking it in different ways. Apple announced 3,000 jobs, but because they couldn't get their 252-acre campus up immediately, they leased a bunch of space. Google has brought 1,000 jobs of cloud engineering here. Meta's here with their metaverse people. Boston Consulting Group got here because during the middle of COVID, they asked their people where they were living, and they were all living in the Triangle. So people are moving here for the quality of life. And by the way, we happen to be 1/3 less expensive than the major cities. But it's really about quality of life and attraction that we're seeing significant inflow. Now, we still have the buildings that David's talking about that will go to ground because they're empty on basic office space. But our inflow has been, I would say, first of all, tech space and as sort of the leader showing the direction. But Linda can really talk about some of the growth in the in the manufacturing and the life sciences. She has better expertise than I do.
Yeah, so let's go to Linda. Thanks, Scott. And one thing I'll say, both from David's perspective, Atlanta, Tech Square, Georgia Tech, and Scott's Duke, the authenticity of the market, as Scott said, is the key. And the authenticity is there's really smart students, faculty, entrepreneurs, and innovators that are doing great work in these markets. So as we've said, it's not just about the real estate. Oftentimes it's all these soft things that you really can't measure. But when you do start to measure and you say, how much vacancy do you have at Tech Square? And we say 0, we go back to, well, it's because people can collaborate together. Smart people can collaborate together. So Linda, sorry, what are you seeing in the Triangle Greater and then even in North Carolina?
Sure. Well, first I'd like to answer the question on, ecosystem and the ingredients of a healthy ecosystem. I think, Scott would agree with me. In our region, not just applicable to the park, but we have a strong ecosystem, strength of the universities, the talent pool, because I work directly on the Apple transaction yet to be built in RTP. It was about talent pool. It was about quality of life. It was about the site and its privacy for a company like Apple. I would say what helps us weather the storm in this ecosystem is the diverse industries. We aren't just tech. We aren't, we're biotech, ag tech, life science, pharmaceutical. I mean, there are many, many when you slice and dice the life science piece, there's many different layers of it. And I think also back to that quality of life, that strong sense of community, I would say in our region, even within the real estate community, it's really strong collaborative. I know from an economic development standpoint, we are 3 cities, not 1 MSA. And so you really have competing demands, and it's interestingly lines up with Duke, UNC, and NC State in those respective cities. But the partnership that I see in this community and here in other areas is probably one of the strengths. I mean, we, for all intents and purposes at RTP, are a competitor of Centennial Campus. We work with them very collaboratively, as we do with Duke, NC State, and UNC. One of the other things that I've seen, in the past decade for sure, and especially when you have a park or innovation district that is as old as RTP, is really evolution. I mean, there's been an evolution from, we talked in preparation for this webinar about your grandfather's research park. You could say that that's RTP, right? Textbook definition. But what I have seen and others is institutional capital over the last decade has come into the market, not just in RTP, but in this market from gateway markets. And it's really paved the way for our ability to have that growth we saw in the pandemic. I mean, it was probably historically in this region one of the biggest, $5 billion in investment announcements, creation of 8,700 jobs during from 2020 through 2023. And I think it's really goes back to the 3 R1s, the university system, the talent pool, and in particular from an institutional capital perspective, value. I mean, there was lots of value. The campus that Duke is on, the medical campus, is an old GSK campus, a single user legacy R&D company that is no longer in the park. And so on its campus, they had about 1.7 million square footage. Duke Medicine took a big portion of that. And it took developers, private developers coming from out of market into the market. And it's really created this strength that we have developers that know how to build life science, that know how to build advanced manufacturing. And that helps with speed to market, ability to do spec, although we're not seeing a lot of spec here now. There is still some absorption to be had. But those are some of the strengths I see in this market in particular.
If I can just add in, so you talked about the anchor institutions, but I was able to do the Google transaction and the Meta transaction. They're also here because the HBCUs, right?
Yeah.
You're here because North Carolina Central is here. Our entire city board is BIPOC. Our entire county council is female. They want that authenticity. They want that diversity. They could build it in California. They could build it in the states that all look like everybody on this call. They don't want that. They want the next generation.
Good point.
Yeah, that is really good, Scott. And to somewhat of a segue there is, okay, so we're talking about these markets. We're talking about Atlanta, Raleigh, Durham in particular right now. And we're saying we're not suffering the same trends, but I bet there's a lot of people in Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill, Atlanta that would say, yes, we are. So, why is it that this particular micro market is successful? And we say we know why, but are you seeing that micro market emerge too, where one building is right next door to the other building, one is very successful, one is falling to the current trends? David, do you have an example?
Well, yeah, I'll come back. I mean, I think when you said an example, because what Linda and Scott said, I think is really important, and an aspect of that I don't hear enough people talking about. We kind of are lumping in whatever we call these innovation districts. Mm-hmm. And RTP has got a lot more than just research going on there, right? And it's what Scott talked about, companies wanting to come because of the authenticity, because of the local culture. To me, you really can group this demand. Yes, there are researchers. I mean, they're the wild hair and they're in their labs trying to find the new thing. There's also a lot of companies that we think of as research innovative companies, but they're actually very mature. They just happen to be technology companies. And they have employees and they want their employees to go to work in neat places with great cultures. And so they are drawn to, nice places like a Durham or Raleigh or Chapel Hill or a Birmingham. There are lots of places that they're not coming to do research there. They're coming to execute on their company's business, and they have those people. So that's a whole different segment. It's not research per se. It's just they're technology-oriented companies. They generally have a pretty young workforce. And then you got to add in the manufacturing. That this is not, just white collar. This is, in the case of RTP, their biomanufacturing's off the charts. I mean, they have become the new Western New Jersey. I mean, they really do compete with the established markets because they've got the workforce. And that's a different thing than scientists in laboratories.
Yeah, and I would, to add to that, David, I mean, we've seen a spillover effect in the entire region. I mean, you have bedroom communities, Fujifilm Diosynth, who is in the park, but has one of the biggest, contract research facilities in Holly Springs. It is enormous. It's the size of a football field, enclosed. So there's a lot of that spillover effect that helps back to the diverse industries.
Yeah, so I mean, again, I just wanted to point out, Kevin, that this is a plural noun when we talk about what's going on in these places. But, to talk about how fine the lines can be, and great example, one that shocked me. So I'm sitting in Midtown Atlanta at the corner of Spring and 5th Street. At the corner of Spring and 14th Street, 9 blocks to the north, there's a brand new building. I mean, the kind of Class A plus building that you think that's where people are going to go. And it just, after a year, didn't have the first lease signed. And it was just had to be recapitalized at under $200 a foot, which I would suggest is probably 35 cents on the dollar of actual just incurred cost to build it. So an absolute disaster. And as you pointed out, we're sitting here in 700,000 feet with less than 0.3% vacancy. It is so micro in some respects that to say, well, this city or that city's got it going. I mean, it's crafted brick by brick, and it's tight.
Yeah, and even further on that, you said 14th Street. We can also tell the story, which is about the future of work, which is NCR world headquarters is here at Tech Square. They built 2 buildings, delivered them right at COVID. Did not have the same success that Scott did in attracting a tenant on March 13, 2020. But as the work from home concept stayed with NCR, they have deoccupied 1 full building. So it literally is not a block away. It's 15 feet away from the building that we're in, where we're 100% with a wait list, and that building is vacant, waiting for an occupant. Now the rent rolls would say, well, no, NCR is paying rent, so that's they're not necessarily in trouble. NCR's got a big expense, but so it wouldn't show up as a vacant building.
Yeah, but I mean, we're not talking about national trends. I mean, Midtown Atlanta is the strongest market in Atlanta. Atlanta is certainly one of the top markets in the Sun Belt Southeast. And the best market in Atlanta is now over 30% vacant. So, I mean, really, location matters. What goes on in the building still matters quite a bit. Yeah. And particularly in urban, because we don't have that variety that you guys have up in Raleigh-Durham, the Triangle area. I mean, we are much more heavily research-centric and corporate innovation center-centric, and we can get to that, Kevin, I mean, that whole other aspect of why people might come here and help support our demand that other people aren't enjoying.
Well, let's go ahead, keep going, and then we'll get Scott and Linda. What are some of the other reasons why we're not experiencing the trends that we're seeing in other places? I mean, what are just some of the life cycle of experiences that occur at innovation hubs that are helping us stay away from those?
Well, I'll tell you, part of it is we are slow and small. Meaning you know, everybody's gonna build first in Boston and some of the bigger cities, right? So they're gonna overbuild there first. We have always been counter to that trend in that we were last to build, which means we're not overbuilt. So with the exception of a little bit of space, we're not overbuilt except for office space. But most of the office space, in that case, it's a 90s class office space or an early 2000s, not a 2020 plus type building.
Yeah, I would say, Scott, on that, to me, the difference in the character, you're exactly right. Those primary markets, you know, every developer went in all spec, and we're the ones that are gonna, you actually realize the demand that's there. Of course, they overbuilt because nobody coordinated how much they were building with how much demand there was. And I do think there is a notion in commercial real estate development that I'll deliver the best architectured building, the most stunning impact on the skyline, the greatest lobby, maybe the best access to the interstate. And that's why they'll come. And the building's desirability is what makes the demand for it. Contrast that with what we do. We're not going to build a pretty enough building to grow a college's research enterprise.
Mm-hmm.
They have to have a program that grows research through dynamic faculty acquisitions and industry partnerships. That creates the demand that we come to meet with our facilities, but we don't have any illusion that we can spec it out and make those other things happen. I do. That's a natural regulator on how far out in front we get, to Scott's point.
And I would add also, from a different sort of take on programming, you know, one of the things that we had to do at RTP was in particular, where we're building 100-acre, what we're calling the new downtown of RTP, was it started with 500,000 square feet of old IBM space, 1980s, not pretty, but it has become a successful, you know, stabilized even through COVID asset. And it's because we program, not just R&D programming, but, you know, oftentimes innovation districts will ask, like, how do you do that? It's like, you've got to get into the low hanging fruit, which is lunch and learns, happy hours, all sorts of programs, because building community is what makes real estate that's not, quote, sexy, highly desirable. Because in this day and age, it's you know, Class B space that lends itself to Class A amenities in terms of what drives a diverse talent pool and what they want. And with more and more corporate real estate groups not driving the decision and HR driving the decision, you know, what we found was, you know, that type of building community, and we built a brand. I think, Scott, you can attest to that.
I will say you so undersold that. It is Class C space, and it's the place to be. They gave it away for a while, and now they don't have enough room. So
yeah, I mean,
if you want to have an advisor, have Linda come to you to help create a place, because she knows exactly how to do it much better than anybody I've ever seen.
Well, that's sweet. Thank you. Yeah, we took a lot of risk for a not-for-profit. But as Scott Leviton would say, we bet the farm, and we were, you know, we gave up our beautiful, cushy headquarter building to Alexandria Real Estate because they gave us an offer we couldn't refuse. And we moved into that Class B awesome space, as Scott Selig puts it. The other thing I would say is, you know, just thinking about sort of lessons learned, and I don't say this from lessons learned from us, although I have quite a few in my time at RTP, but, you know, we have a very traditional builder who built up an area called Midtown Raleigh, Kane Real Estate, extremely successful, built up an area not unlike Midtown Atlanta. And, you know, a number of years ago, you know, they came out with this you know, new direction of their mixed use in a traditional standpoint, hotel, residential, dense residential, dense office commercial space. And they came up with a direction to build an innovation district. And I think when they first kind of went out with it, it's just like they're trying to get into an area that they're not proximate to the universities, they're not proximate to where those types of uses kind of take place. And now today, having gone spec, they're retrofitting life science buildings that are not insignificant, 150 to 2,000 square feet, into office use. So it's just kind of an example of where you can have a very strong area geographically because of RTP, because of the universities, but you can get ahead of your skis on going out on that big of a chunk of space. Core and shell for a lab building is much more expensive than a commercial office building. So that's just one sort of example to bring up where we're not really, maybe we're poised to weather the storm better than other areas, but we still are not without, situations that developers are having to pivot on.
Yeah. All right, I'm gonna make one reminder. We're about 13 minutes left. If you've got questions, we're happy to transition into audience questions. We as you can tell, we can just keep talking even longer. But if you do, go into the Q&A or into the chat, and I'll pick those up. So the future work, we mentioned that phrase that's on a lot of people's mind right now. So what do you all think about the future of work? Especially as it relates to innovation hubs, are we going to have continued demand in our innovation hubs for work of all kinds? Where do y'all just see? What are you prognosticating right now? Scott?
Oh, I would say we are where we're going. I don't see anything that tells me that there's going to be any dramatic shift. Nobody's going to scream and yell and everybody's going to run back to work one day. I think you have to assume we are where we're going. And I do think there's going to be in innovation districts, some people coming back to the office simply because, again, if you're doing lab or what is effectively production work, as David said, you've got to be there. You can't do that in your office at home. But I do not expect a dramatic back to work. We're right at 50 to 60%, depending on what city, what day, et cetera, et cetera. I think we're there, and I think it's going to be incumbent on the cities and the municipalities to figure out how to deal with that database, because there are going to be absolutely empty buildings that aren't going to be turned into apartments. But I think we are.
Got it. We'll come back to that.
We are where we're going.
We'll come back to that conversion if we have time. David, what do you think on future work?
So a slightly different take than Scott. I agree. I don't think that the call you back to work is where we're going to head, but I do think, and we're focusing, I think it's recognizing not so much what's the changed nature of work, what's the changed nature of the workplace? What is the value proposition that we're expecting employers and employees to get out of these places that we hold out as workplaces? And this is where we're a little bit trying to escape the mere physical real estate. To go back to the original point, why do people come? Well, we think there's this congregational value of, hey, wouldn't you like to go to work? Isn't it fun to go to work where you have a chance to meet people that are different, that are brilliant, that are curious, that are engaged, and that's the kind of people that you get to work with. And they're not your company colleagues, they're others, right? It's just a little bit of an intellectual Woodstock, if you will, right? That's the way we kind of want to think of our properties. And to that extent, you start realizing that the building might just be an icon that really is a symbol of the knowledge network that it represents. And as that, where we're moving right now is a lot more very detailed inventorying of expertise, of interests, of collaborative history, of collaborative attributes of everyone there. And you know, it's not the kind of thing that the old property managers ever did. We used to have, here's the tenant contact, right? And we told them when we were gonna have the popsicle party every summer, right? And the word spread. No, we are doing census type deep dives into the people that we have here and consciously linking them up on the notion that we're trying to get you to think that by being an occupant of one of our properties, you've effectively joined in a tribe, a nation that you can have citizenship in, and it entitles you to expect your other citizens, your fellow citizens, to work with you, to be an amenity to you. And I think that in a world where commercial success will require more and more rapid discovery and adoption of newer technologies, that's going to become more and more obvious that that's what enterprises need out of their real estate and their workforces, is that agility and creativity that we're seeing as kind of the future of what we're trying to build.
So David,
if I can add one more thing, it takes literally not a village, it takes a community. You have to, you know, Richmond's ahead of the curve in that sense. South Bend is starting to come together. It takes not just the university, it takes not just the developers, it takes the person who's running the downtown association, it takes the Chamber of Commerce, it takes the music industry, it takes the people putting on festivals. You have to work as an entire community on the political level as well as on the economic level. This is not necessarily going to be real estate led. It's going to be community led, and you have to bring everybody, and you have to want to bring everybody. And so to the places that are moving that direction and really bringing them together, those are the ones that I hold out hope for, and those are the ones that I think they're going to win. Perfect.
And Scott and David, y'all, both of your answers even answers Laura's question. I don't know if y'all can see it, I'll read it. How can you measure and quantify the intangibles that attract and bring companies into successful parks, like the authenticity and culture? Is it simply an accident, or demographics of the area, or can you help create the right environment? How? Which again, I think that's a perfect answer for part of what you all have just said, or perfect question for part of what y'all just answered. But you know, David, I know you think a lot about quantification. There's a science answer to this.
Yeah, I think, you know, so for so long and still today, and we're still doing it. So I'm not judging anybody, but for 25 years, it seemed like there was a competition of who had the best photos of events and the best copyright people who could tell a narrative that painted the picture of our properties as utopia. And oh my gosh, look at the dynamic things. And that company got started, it was 4 years ago, but it was all really a PR spin kind of approach, and nothing but anecdotes and superstition was really offered. And you know, if that's the entirety of the world, people are going to pick who's got the best pictures and the best narrative and what seems to be vital. And yes, we are trying to bring some science to that. It is painfully difficult. And I'm sure we're doing it wrong, but as I said, this is a laboratory. And so, you know, we haven't hired a real estate person in at least a year and a half. We hire data scientists, we hire PhDs in various disciplines of science, so that we can do these deep dives. Okay, we've got 34 PIs. We know what their subject matters are. We want to know how many of them actually know each other. How many people in machine learning in that building know the machine learning vertical people in the tech transfer office, and how many of those know the machine learning vertical in the incubator downstairs? And what we're finding is if you just did the math on the permutations of what the number of relationships that are theoretically possible, we're low single digits of just being aware of each other. So we are trying to say, we want to do a good enough job that we can see it in the numbers year over year. And again, that's just brand new.
Yeah.
That's so far from your grandfather's
Yeah.
property management.
And Linda, you may have a thought on that as well, because again, Scott gave you a great compliment, which we have heard is true, of there is not many people better, there are not many people better in the country at getting these people out and collaborating. Are you able to quantify, and I think the real question is it an accident? The things that you're doing, is it an accident? Are you able to quantify the things that make your place attractive?
Yeah, well, number one, it's not an accident what we were aspiring to achieve. There was a lot of intent and purpose put into it. But what I will say is it is hard to quantify the ROI. But I do have a couple of ROIs that I could point to. I think what you have to do, it goes back to what Scott said, it is about the community. You can put programs on or try to build community. If you don't get buy-in and consensus from, those that are part of it and want to be stewards of it or want to leave their mark on it, then you're not probably going to be as successful. And I think I cannot take credit. Thank you, Scott, though. We had at RTP, which was part of my team, and I know another part of my team, Kelly Probes, VP of Marketing Communications, is on. I saw you on the list. Hi, Kelly. Incredible team. I mean, we had a team of probably a quarter of the staff were in the programming and an event and placemaking team, because that's where we had incredibly talented, strong folks that woke up every day to be successful at placemaking. So placemaking is now a common word, where when we embarked on it with, when nobody wanted to come out to the park, you couldn't get a cup of coffee, you couldn't buy a meal unless you were on IBM's campus, and you had to be an employee. Covenants are still the same today, but we brought people out and we gave them free co-working and free coffee, free Wi-Fi, surface parking, which isn't great. It's kind of a bad word, but at the time, free parking. And so slowly but surely, we built up this reputation in the Frontier campus, and then brought Boxyard on, our first retail concept, open air music, food and beverage, all in a goal to keep building out that downtown, which is RTP, Hub RTP, and it's a true mixed use with hotel, life science, office, residential. I promise I'm not doing a plug for RTP, but it's part of my life for so long, and you don't always get it right. But it isn't, how we looked at, metrics was, is our parking lot full, most days of the week with people wanting to come into the office? Yes, we're probably at about 70% occupancy on certain days. Do we, put surveys out, things that are more popular are lean into those things and not to the things that aren't. So we were very scrappy, very entrepreneurial, and had to do so to evolve to what, they used to say researchers like being behind the bench. They don't like to be social. Well, it's a different landscape today. It's a different, set of requirements.
Perfect. That's a good place to end. Again, we could keep going on, but let me thank Linda, Scott, and David. I'm going to have Vicki come back on, but I'll kind of wrap this up with the question was, are challenges in national commercial real estate affecting innovation districts and research parks? And I think you've heard a lot of statements, but the answer is no, because we're not talking about real estate. Again, it's, the manifestation of real estate, but we're not talking about real estate. We're talking about what goes in and what goes on at research parks. I mean, that's why we're successful, and it's an active sport. It starts from, like I said, starts from conception, doesn't end until it doesn't end. We're just constantly going through the life cycle of making this place better It just happens to be this phrase called real estate, even though we would not call it commercial real estate. All righty. Thank you all, David, Scott, Linda. Vicki, back to you.
Yeah, thank you. Amen, amen, amen. This was great. Thank you so much for your insight and your experience and the thoughtful discussion. So again, this is one of our TBED, Technology-Based Economic Development Communities of Practice series webinars. It's a mouthful. Some of the other programs that we have coming up is our BioHealth Caucus, which will be in San Diego. Hello, San Diego. June 2nd through 3rd. And the theme of that program is building a better world, and it's a jam-packed agenda just right prior to our Bio International Convention. And on Monday also there's the opportunity to attend a co-located event with BCI Global at the hotel as well. Then fast forward to August, thank you. We have our inaugural Clean Tech and Building Resiliency Caucus at the Saint-Gobain North America headquarters in Malvern, Pennsylvania. And just as a reminder to many that I think are on this call, but Saint-Gobain is a pre-approved AIA CE provider. So let your colleagues know that they can get CE credits as well. Then in November, we're going to wrap up the year, a great year at the University of Arkansas and the University of Arkansas Technology Development Foundation. So we'll be in Bentonville and Fayetteville, and make your plans early, and plan on some R&R on the trails. The theme is All Trails Lead to Innovation. Registration and agenda will be opening up in June, July. So I think we have another slide. We had a little technology hiccup earlier. So just as a reminder, we have another webinar happening next week with Jeff Smith with MSU, and then Russ Saras with Fraunhofer. So that's on the 23rd next week. And then in September, we'll have on space and aerospace technologies. And then October, we'll have clean tech ecosystems. Then we'll have some peer roundtables coming up in June, August, and in November. So again, just sign up for those, and we'll build that community. So again, we are about building communities of innovation. So thank you for being here, and I look forward to connecting soon. Thank you.